Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome to Crack a Pack a Day. Every day, I'm going to open a booster pack of Magic the Gathering cards and evaluate the contents, choosing one of them to take as if I were taking part in a draft, and this was pack 1, pick 1. Today, we've got another pack of Battle for Zendikar, so let's open it up and take a look. Our first card is Coral Helm Guide, a 2/1 Merfolk Scout ally for 1 and a blue. You can pay 4 and a blue so that a target creature can't be blocked this turn. This seems like a pretty solid card. Even though the toughness is a little small for 2 mana, the 2 power is quite good. The best thing about this card though is that it's good at almost every stage in the game. It's a good play on turn 2, but it's also a good play on turn 7. So if the board is snarled up, you can let your biggest creature sneak past your opponent's blockers. About the only place it doesn't do terribly well is if you're losing, but at that point it does just as well as any other 2-drop does. Overall, I think that this is a pretty solid card. In a weak pack, this wouldn't be a terrible first pick. Nocarno Assassin is a 2/3 Vampire Assassin ally for 2 and a black. Whenever you gain life, it gains Death Touch until end of turn. A 2/3 for 3 isn't great, so you're relying on the ability to make up for it. Unfortunately, this card's ability isn't all that good. Whilst I like Death Touch, making it conditional on gaining life seems a little too awkward to rely on. On the offense, this isn't great even with the Death Touch, because it's only 2 life your opponent is losing. And it's much harder to trigger life gain on the defense, which is where Death Touch usually shines. In a deck with a number of life gaining cards, this could probably do some work, but in a vacuum, it's just not that great. I won't be taking this first. Oren Reef Invoker is a 2/2 human shaman for 1 and a green. You can pay 8 colorless mana to give it +5/+5 and trample until end of turn. A 2/2 for 2 is a good card to begin with, though it sometimes peters off a little towards the end of a long game. But Oren Reef Invoker doesn't. If you already have it in play, then when you get to 8 mana, you can make it a 7/7 with trample every turn. Unlike the Coral Helm Guide, it's not quite so good later in the game on the turn you actually cast it, making it a slightly worse late game top deck, but afterwards it's possibly more powerful. Overall, this seems like a very solid card with applications throughout the entire game. In a weak pack, I wouldn't be too sad to pick this first. Angelic Gift is an aura for 1 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and it enchants a creature which gains flying. Drawing a card is nice, but that only happens if it enters the battlefield. If the target creature is removed before the spell resolves, then it won't, and you don't get to draw a card. The flying is of minimal worth. Without any power or toughness bonuses, it's probably not worth having the card in the deck at all. If you're struggling for playable cards, then I can see maybe putting it in your deck simply because it replaces itself. Overall, this isn't a terribly powerful card, and I won't be taking it first. Belligerent Whiptail is a 4/2 worm for 3 and a red. It has a landfall ability, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gains first strike until end of turn. Whilst the 4 power is nice, that 2 toughness is a significant weakness, especially on a 4-drop. Without first strike, it's vulnerable to 2-drops, and even with first strike, it's still vulnerable to burn spells. The landfall ability is pretty nice, though as a 4-drop, you're probably not going to get too many chances to use it unless the game goes very long. Since it does have landfall, it's probably better attacking rather than blocking, though the 4 power can be used to trade up for a more expensive attacker. All in all, this isn't a great card, but you'll probably still put it into your deck. I won't be first picking it though. Looming Spires is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains first strike until end of turn. It can tap for a red mana. This card has applications in both the early and the late game. In the early game, you can just play it as a land, but in the late game, it's almost like half a spell. The ability isn't as powerful as a full spell, but you're not using a spell slot in your deck to get the effect. Overall, I reckon this is going to go well in most decks that play red and give you a little extra power in an otherwise unpowered land slot. However, I won't be taking this first. Fertile Thicket is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you may look at the top 5 cards of your library. If you do, you reveal up to 1 basic land card from among them, then put that card on top of your library, and the rest on the bottom in any order. It also taps for 1 green mana. Fertile Thicket is part of the same cycle of lands as Looming Spires, where you get a minor spell effect on a land that enters play tapped. Despite not affecting the board, I think that it's a more powerful ability, especially in the early game, which is usually when you want to play lands that enter play tapped. It gives you the chance to keep hands with a smaller number of lands in them, because you've got a really good chance of hitting an additional land in the top 5 cards of your deck. I can even see keeping a 1-land hand with a lot of 2-drops in it if that land is Fertile Thicket. And in the late game, where you'll likely want to draw a spell rather than a land, you don't even have to use the ability. Overall, this is a solid card, but probably not worth taking pack 1 pick 1. Snapping Gnarlid is a 2/2 beast for 1 and a green. It has a landfall ability, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, this gets +1/+1 until end of turn. A 2/2 for 2 is good, and it'll probably attack as a 3/3 for the first few turns of the game. That seems like a really good deal to me. On the defensive, or in the late game, it's not anything terrific, but it's still a 2/2. This is a very solid card that will likely go well into any green deck, though would work best in a slightly more aggressive one. I don't think it's good enough to take first here, though in a weak pack it could well be first pickable. Up next is Spell Shrivel, an instant for 2 and a blue. It has Devoid and counter target spell unless its controller pays 4. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. Like most counterspells, Spell Shrivel is a sideboard card. You're going to want to bring it out of the sideboard in games 2 and 3 if your opponent shows you a number of powerful, expensive spells. With the amount of Scion creature tokens floating around, the fact your opponent can pay 4 to prevent this from having its effect is quite relevant. It does help with process, as it exiles the countered spell, but you probably don't want to rely on it to fuel all of your processes. All in all, as a sideboard card, I won't be taking it first. Complete Disregard is an instant for 2 and a black. It has Devoid, and it exiles target creature with power 3 or less. I think this is a pretty powerful card, in the early to mid game at least. You're affecting the board with it, it'll almost always have a target, it's instant speed, and it exiles, so it helps with processes. The only downsides are that it doesn't do anything against your opponent's biggest creatures, and that if your opponent has a pump spell, they could blank this spell's effect. Overall, this is a good card. There's a reasonable chance this might be my first pick. Our first uncommon is Rot Shambler, a 1/1 fungus for 1 and a green. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this card. A 1/1 for 2 is pretty bad, so the ability would need to be powerful to make up for it. How does Rot Shambler's ability fare? Well, I reckon it's playable in the right deck. If you have a number of Scion token generators, or a few of the handful of other cards in the set that allow you to sacrifice creatures, then this is probably a good card in that deck. In most other decks, though, I don't rate it quite so highly. Overall, I'd want to take this a little later, once I knew that I had a bunch of Scion token makers. I don't want to take this pack 1 pick 1. Adverse Conditions is an instant for 3 and a blue. It has Devoid, and taps up to 2 target creatures which don't untap during their controller's next untap step. You also put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield that has sacrifice this creature, add 1 to your mana pool. Usually, this kind of card goes best in an aggressive deck. You use it to tap down your opponent's blockers so you can swing with your creatures to win the game. But in this case, I think there are a few more applications. Among other things, you're adding a body to the board, so rather than just having a temporary effect on the board, you're actually affecting it too. And you can later use that body to ramp, so it can help you get to your late game as well. On the defensive, Adverse Conditions does okay, because you can lock down 2 attacking creatures for 2 turns, and also get a chump blocker, which isn't terribly bad. Overall, I think this is a solid card that a number of, though not all, blue decks will want. I don't think it's good enough to get picked first, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on later in the pack. Jaddy Offshoot is an 0/3 plant for green. It has Defender and a landfall ability, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. An 0/3 Defender for 1 isn't a great deal, though it will likely be able to block a few of your opponent's early drops. The landfall ability isn't all that great either, as the life gain is minimal. It's a shame it's not white or black, as those are the colours that care about repeatable life gain in Battle for Zendikar. If you cast this on turn 1, then you can probably expect to gain 5 or 6 life throughout the game, and probably prevent yourself from losing some from 2 power attackers too. Unfortunately, if you top deck this later in the game, it won't really do much to help you at all. And it doesn't help you win the game if you're trying to shut your opponent out. Overall, I don't think this is a great card, and I won't be taking it first. Our rare is Ruinous Path, a sorcery for 1 black/black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. It has Awaken 4 for 5 black/black. This is a powerful spell, even without the Awaken ability. The chance to kill any creature or planeswalker for only 3 mana is both powerful and efficient. And when you factor in that in the late game you can get a 2 for 1 by turning one of your lands into a 4/4 as well, is just the icing on the cake. The only weaknesses it has are that it's sorcery speed and has double black in its casting cost, so you'll likely want to skew your draft towards black so that you can cast it on turn 3 if you need to. Ruinous Path is a great card and will likely be my pack 1 pick 1. We also have a forest and a core ally token. Right then, let's have a quick review of all the cards in our pack. I think the obvious choice here is Ruinous Path. Whilst Complete Disregard is an instant, the fact that Ruinous Path can take out creatures of any size, as well as planeswalkers, makes it far more versatile for an almost identical mana cost. Ruinous Path is my choice today. And that's about all we've got time for today. If you disagree with my choice, then please let me know in the comments below, on Facebook, or on Twitter. Have a good day now!